Hello, and thank you for joining, and apologies for a few technical difficulties getting started on our end. But we are very excited to welcome you today to our webinar as part of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Campaign. Today's webinar, hosted by the Student Borrower Protection Center and Veterans Education Success, is entitled Service Members, Veterans, and Public Service Loan Forgiveness. To begin today's presentation, we will have Chris Medeo, Vice President for Legal Affairs from Veterans Education Success, speak to the audience. Chris?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Medeo from Veterans Education Success. I'm very happy to be here and pleased to speak to you about public service loan forgiveness, especially as it relates to student veterans, service members, and their family. Appreciate those here live today, as well as those who will be watching this recording at a later date. First, I'd like to, of course, thank all the veterans and service members, their families, for their service to our country, especially in light of all the news around Afghanistan in the last few weeks. Certainly a difficult time for all folks who have served, especially in and around Afghanistan. Certainly, though, public service, SEG and public service loan forgiveness, it's as important as ever that this program, which was designed for those who are giving back to our country, doing public service, especially those giving to our country via military service, deserve to get their student loans discharged after they've spent those 10 years doing that work. So the purpose of today is really to talk about some of the things you need to know so that you can get what you're earned and are entitled to, which is a cancellation of any student loan debts that you may have after the period of time required by the law. And something else I'll cover later is that the Department of Education has opened a comment period where they want to hear from students, veterans, service members, organizations, and anyone who has a stake in the public service loan forgiveness program. So I'm going to touch on that and explain why it's really important the Department of Education hears from you, your family, your friends, and anyone you know about their experience trying to get or getting, if for the few that have obtained the public service loan forgiveness of their student loan. One point, especially to take away here, is unfortunately almost no one has gotten to public service loan forgiveness, or as I'll call it, PSLF, to date, especially military-connected students. A recent Government Accountability Office, or the GAO, report found that as of January 2020, 94% of PSLF applicants from the Department of Defense were denied. And only 124 active duty service members had qualified. So that's obviously pathetic for a program that was designed over 10 years ago. There's more than enough time for people who have spent 10 years in public service to be able to have their their student loans discharged. So the point of today's topic is to walk through the requirements, make sure that you understand what it is you need to be doing, and then, as I said, encourage comments to the Department of Education so they can improve this program to ensure that those that should qualify and do qualify obtain the discharge of their student loans for which they are. The requirements of PSLF are relatively straightforward. First, you need to be employed by a federal, state, local, or tribal government or a not-for-profit organization. Federal service, obviously, and certainly includes U.S. military service. There is a form of the employment verification form that you need to fill out. You should fill it out, not just once, but kind of routinely. Certainly, anytime you get a new job, you want to be filling out that form, and you provide the form to the servicer of your student loan. The servicers are companies like Navient, Nelnet, Great Lakes, FedLoan. I'll get to FedLoan later. But those are the companies that are the student loan servicers for federal student loans, and are companies that are the ones that would receive the forms that you would submit to them and ask questions, and they are the ones that would answer your questions about PSLF. So you fill out your form that says where you work, As I said, you want to be doing that when you start a new job, but you also want to be doing that, I would say, at least every year. And the reasons are, again, just to make sure you're on track, make sure that the job that you're working is still approved as a qualifying public service job. Again, it's not the role you're doing in that job. It really doesn't matter what you're doing, as long as you're not kind of lobbying. What matters is that you work for that 501c3 organization. So that's what's really key, is where you work, not what you do. A small note, federal contractors may not always comply or meet the requirements. So that's really why it's important that when you're starting a job, fill out that form, get it to the your servicer, so that it's very clear that you would be someone who qualifies, and you know that you qualify while you're making your payments. You need to work full time for the organization. So that is generally 30 hours or whatever your organization defines as full time, whichever is greater. So probably that means 40 hours a week. However, if your organization says that 30 hours is full time, that would be the minimum that you could work and still receive credit. You can work 2 part-time jobs that equal basically full-time. That works too. But if you are just part-time, 20 hours a week, that would not qualify as full-time employment, and any payments made while you're working there as a part-time employee would not count towards PSLF. So next, you need to have direct loans. Direct loans are a form of a federal student loan. So certainly any private student loan, a loan meaning a loan owned by a bank or other non-federal, a non-federal government entity, would not count. And not all federal loans count. And this is very important. Generally speaking, loans taken out after 2010 are going to be what's called direct loans. Don't worry about the term Stafford. Really, the term is either direct loan or FFEL, FEL loans, Federal Family Education Loans. Those FEL loans are not direct loans, and they do not count for PSLF. So if you took out a loan before 2010, it wouldn't count. You can consolidate it, and meaning turn it into a direct loan. And you want to talk to your loan servicer about how that works, what the pros and cons are to doing that. But any payments you made on a loan while it was a FFEL loan would not count to PSLF. That's a big failing with the program, and certainly it's something that needs to be looked at by the Department of Education. And as I'll mention later, but when I get to the discussion about making comments to the Department of Education. But if you made payments on a FEL loan that you thought were going to count towards PSLF, and now you're finding out, as many students have, it made 10 years, for instance, of payments on a FEL loan, and it's not going to count, you should tell the Department of Education that, because that's a shame that you were never told, if you were never told that you needed to have and transfer those loans into a direct loan for it to count. So again, it needs to be a direct loan. If you're not sure, we can talk about later, and Winston will talk through this as well later. Certainly, what's really important is, and we'll talk about more, make sure you have the income-driven repayment plan, make sure you have, and you make the 120 payments as well. And Winston's going to cover some of these points later. What's really important is that you be your own advocate, keep all your paperwork, keep track of the servicer website. So some points for especially focusing on student veterans and active duty service members to consider are that you should check the website often and make sure that you don't miss payments or miss notifications, things that would have been mailed to you. You want to really be sure that you are getting all information that you should get and need to get. And so if you have electronic notifications, that might be something to turn on or look at, or at least make sure that your servicer isn't mailing something to an address that you're no longer at. If you are in a deferment or a forbearance during military service, during active duty, or other reasons related to military service, what's really important is that you understand that those payments may not count towards, or those time periods, that is, because you're probably not making payments during a forbearance, would not count. So you need to really understand the implications or what's going on while you're taking a deferment or a forbearance. Because that's really, because there are ways sometimes forbearances do count. Right now, in the pandemic, student loan payments are paused. These times, these months are counting towards PSLF. So it's really a shame that deferments and forbearances while folks are on active duty do not count. And that might be something that you could include in a comment to the federal government. So turning to that comment, we really want to encourage people to do that. And we're going to tell you how you can do that later, to really consider sending a short comment, or basically a letter or a discussion, it doesn't have to be anything long, about your experience with PSLF, because the Department of Education needs to hear from people. It's not necessarily that you're complaining about you, it's helping others. So the department hears the stories and can make changes that help your sisters and brothers who have been in military service and have served the country and are maybe not able or don't hear this presentation and know about the issues that are confronting and are preventing people from getting their PSLF that they have earned. So we want to encourage people who have made payments while they had FFEL loans and didn't know they needed to be direct loans. Make a comment. If you're working for an organization that doesn't qualify, but you think it should, because it's related to military service or working with veterans, you make a comment about that. If you are, or your payments or your months during a deferment or a forbearance aren't counting towards PSLF, make a comment about that. The department really needs to hear from you and hear your voice in this process. So I'm going to stop there. I think we're going to turn it over now to Winston at Student Borrower Protection Center, who's going to talk through a little bit more of the technical parts of PSLF, and then we'll take some questions later.
Great. And thank you so much, Chris, and thanks everyone for joining. We really think this is important information we want to convey, and it's not always conveyed the way it should be. So Chris did a really great job of sort of guiding us through the conversation we're going to have today. What I'm going to do now is share my screen and walk through some slides that drill down into a lot of the topics that he discussed, and ends with a conversation about this opportunity to comment, this opportunity to flag for the federal government. What's going wrong with your loans and your ability to access public service loan forgiveness, people in your life. Honestly, even if you're not familiar with the program, that's a failing of the program. So there are opportunities to speak and share with the federal government. And as Chris said, it's really a great thing to do for yourself, but for folks in your community and other folks who might not have a voice that they can use right now. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we're going to get started. Okay, so again, hello, my name is Winston Berkman-Breen, and I'm the Policy Counsel and Deputy Director for Advocacy at the Student Borrower Protection Center, which is a nonprofit organization focused on alleviating the burden of student debt for millions of Americans. I'm excited to be here with you all today to discuss public service loan forgiveness, and I'm very grateful to VES for their partnership in hosting this, and for Chris for kicking it off. Okay. So the student loan landscape is vast and complicated, and there's really no way that we can cover everything in an hour-long session. So we're going to focus on today things you need to know to navigate the next few months of student loan repayment, mostly at the federal level, and how that relates to public service loan forgiveness, which is a much broader topic, and opportunities to comment, as I mentioned. So before we jump in, though, let's just take a moment to level set. Student loan debt is a growing crisis in this country. The outstanding student loan debt balance has grown by $1 trillion over the past decade, and there are over 45 million borrowers in the country. So really, the student loan debt crisis affects everyone somehow. Its growth, student loan debt, is far outpacing the growth of other types of household consumer debt, such as credit cards and auto loans and housing debt. And it's also the second largest type of household consumer debt after only mortgage debt. So, we really have a culture that doesn't favor talking about debt, but it is very important to do because we're all dealing with this in some way, shape, or form. So I really encourage folks who learn something today to share it with people in your household or your community, and to encourage them to take action for their own loans. Okay, So as a first step in understanding how to navigate the student loan system, let's briefly talk about the different kinds of student loans out there. Chris mentioned them briefly as well, and how to figure out what kind of loans you have so that you can make sense of the rest of the presentation and how to navigate your own loans going forward. So very broadly speaking, there are federal loans and there are private student loans. The two major types of federal loan programs that you're going to hear about today, or rather there are two, and the first one is called the direct loan program, which Chris mentioned, which are loans that are issued directly from the federal government, directly from the U.S. Department of Education to borrowers. The second major federal student loan program is called the Federal Family Education Loan, or FFEL loan program, which were loans made by private banks as part of a federal program, but which ended in 2010. So there are still millions of FFEL loans out there in repayment with borrowers. The same is true for Perkins loans, which is a loan program you might be familiar with. It's federal loans that are a federal loan program that's run through schools and has also ended. Private loans, on the other hand, are loans that you might get from your bank and are not part of any any federal loan program. They're just purely private loans for education. So you might have a private student loan from Discover or Sallie Mae or SoFi. Another important way to think about these loans, federal loans and private loans, is to think about who owns them. So the federal, it's not actually as intuitive as you think. The federal government owns all direct loans, that type of federal loan, and many FFEL loans, that other type of federal loan. Well, the rest are all privately owned, including some FFEL federal loans. So this distinction became very important for folks last year because the CARES Act and the relief it gave to student loan borrowers depended on whether your loans were owned by the federal government or privately, which we'll talk about. So how do you know which loans yours are and who owns them, right? It's very confusing and folks don't necessarily know. This is in large part because some of the same companies will service federal loans and private loans. So you might work with Navient, for instance, for all of your loans and might not know which of them are federal and which are private because you're just working through the same company. So to see all of your federal loans, you should log into your online account with studentaid.gov and download your loan data. So you can see here on the slide how to navigate. So you go to studentaid.gov and then on the dashboard, view details, which is in the red box there. And then you can download my aid data. If you don't have your login information for studentaid.gov, there are ways to reset it and get access from that website. So once you see the list, that downloaded list of federal loans, you can see the type of loan you have and which of them are owned by the federal government and which of them are privately owned. In this example, we see up by that number 1, it says FFEL. Again, that's that Family Federal Education Loan, that program. And it's subsidized as a certain type. So it says FFEL type, and the lender is listed down at the arrow with number 2 as U.S. Department of Ed. So that's the U.S. Department of Education. So we know it's owned by the federal government. Whereas with this example, we see that the loan at number 1 is a FFEL consolidation loan. So still FFEL, but a different type of FFEL. And then down at number 2, we see that the current lender is listed as U.S. Bank, not the Department of Education. So we know it's a privately owned FFEL loan. This data that you can download will reflect all of your federal loans, no matter who owns them. So if you have loans that you've seen either on your servicer's online login, or that you get statements for, or that you've seen on your credit report, but which do not show up on this downloaded list, then those are likely your private loans. Now, I should say that you might come across a loan on your credit report or something that you just completely do not recognize. You don't know the lender, et cetera. If that happens to you, you should flag it for your credit reporting, the credit bureau, and ask for more information because it's possible that you've been the victim of identity theft and you want to pin that down. But generally speaking, this list will be all the federal loans from studentaid.gov, and any other loan you're aware of is going to be a private loan. So now that you've seen these loan details in action, I'm bringing the slide back up just so you can see how this works with who owns which loan and how the FFEL program can be both federally owned and privately owned. You see that on the left and the right-hand side here. Okay, so what's the difference, right, between these loans? Generally speaking, federal loans have access to all sorts of congressionally required and legally required repayment options and borrower protections. Well, private owns generally only offer the options that the private lender chooses to include. Default and collection practices also differ between the private and public loans. And as I mentioned, whether or not you are receiving assistance under the CARES Act, and the payment pause, on student loans right now is based on who owns your loan. So not the type federal versus private, so much as who owns it, the federal government or a private lender. Okay, so let's actually talk about student loans during the pandemic as we build on this story. So in March of 2020, the Congress passed the CARES Act, and it included a whole suite of protections for student loan borrowers. These protections have been extended by the White House and by the Secretary of Education several times, and currently the relief is set to expire at the end of January. The relief includes a reduction of the interest rate on covered loans for down to 0%, so no interest will accrue during this time since March of last year through January of next year. An automatic suspension of payments, so no payments are required, although you can choose to voluntarily make payments if you want to just be paying down your loan. For borrowers seeking loan forgiveness, like public service loan forgiveness that we'll talk about, each month under this payment pause will count as credit, will count as a qualified payment towards that forgiveness, which again, we'll talk about. And if anyone was in default and experiencing collection, wage garnishment, offset of benefits, et cetera, that has stopped. There's stopped collection during this time period. But critically, the question is who gets this relief? So it's only the borrowers whose loans are owned by the federal government, those direct loans and some FFEL loans. So at this point, you should be aware of whether you're getting the relief because your accounts will have been paused for about a year and a half, and you should have gotten a notice. But I'm bringing this up so you can see that the loans on the left are covered by the payment pause. For the loans on the right, you might still have options if you're struggling to afford your monthly payments. For those privately owned federal loans, those FFEL program loans and Perkins loans, you can still access some types of repayment plans to make your repayment based on your income, which can lower your monthly payment. And you should work with your servicer because you can also, as Chris mentioned, sort of consolidate your loans, which is basically refinancing with the federal government and turning your non-direct loan into a direct loan to access some more options. For private loans, like those, again, that you would get from Bank of America or SoFi, unfortunately, there's not a uniform set of repayment options, and each lender more or less offers what, decides what will be available to their borrowers. If you're having issues paying your private loans, you should speak with your servicer and ask about alternative repayment plans. This might be income-based repayment plans or interest-only repayment plans. You should also ask about short-term deference or forbearance options where you won't have to make payments. Interest might accrue during that time, though. And if you do accept any sort of relief with your lender, your servicer, you should confirm how it's going to be reported on your credit report by the credit bureaus. You don't want a negative report, and you want to make sure it's going to say something like paid as due, since your lender's agreeing to let you make that payment. So it should be paid as due or paid as agreed. If you don't get any relief, if you ask and there's no options, or you apply and get denied, you should ask why. And it's always a good idea if you're getting relief or if you're denied for relief to get things in writing. So you should request confirmation of any phone call you have in writing. Okay, so what do we need to know? So payments are currently scheduled to resume after January. How should you prepare? So first, as Chris mentioned, you should update your contact information. Many folks have had to move over the past year and a half, and you really don't want to miss any notices about payments resuming. You should get your next notice about payments 21 days before the scheduled payment is due. If you made any voluntary payments over the last year, you can request a refund of those payments. Your repayments, after January, when they resume, your monthly payment should be the same amount that you were paying when the pause started about a year and a half ago. If you were already enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan, those that peg those monthly payments to a percentage of your income for federal loans, those have annual recertification deadlines, and the recertification deadline should be extended to after January, and you'll get a notice before you need to renew that. But when you get the notice, you should promptly renew it so that you can keep an affordable payment amount. If you haven't enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan and you're worried about affording payments when they resume, you should look into income-driven options and talk to your servicer about applying. You don't need to wait until payments restart to apply. And finally, if you had an automatic payment set up, withdraw from your bank account or something, that'll turn back on when the pause ends. So if making a full payment from your account directly is going to be an issue for you, you should go ahead and turn that payment system, the automatic payment withdrawal, off, and make sure you do it as soon as you can, but at least 3 business days before the next scheduled payment. But if it's going to be an issue, you should just go ahead now and do it even before you get your next statement. Okay, so another recent announcement that I want to flag for service members and their families that was just made last Friday is that the Department of Education announced it's going to retroactively waive interest that is accrued for certain service members who've been improperly charged that interest. So under federal law, no interest should be charged on loans that were dispersed after October 1, 2008 for service members who are deployed in areas that qualify them for imminent danger or hostile fire pay while they're deployed. So in the past, you had to actually request this basically, and only a small portion of eligible service members accessed this benefit. For instance, in 2019, the department waived interest for approximately 4,800 service members. Now, though, the department is going to identify federal student loan borrowers who serve on active duty and that hostile fire active duty by matching their records from the Department of Education with the DoD's personnel records. So as a result, they can automatically provide the student loan interest benefit to eligible service members, and it's going to be applied retroactively to more than 47,000 current and former active duty service members. So qualifying borrowers and former or current service members should get a notice from their servicer letting them know about this. And this was very recent news, so it might take a few days for you to find out if this applies to you. All right. So, a lot of what we're going to talk about today is public service loan forgiveness. So public service loan forgiveness was created by Congress 14 years ago to provide relief for student debt, relief from student debt for dedicated public service workers. The idea was very simple at the time: work in public service for 10 years and then have your remaining student loan debt forgiven, after whatever payments you've been making for that 10 years. Unfortunately, as we'll see, and as Chris mentioned, the promise has really been denied at every turn. It has not been working out so well. So how does PSLF actually work? I'm going to sort of run through some of the same topics Chris did and drill down on several of them with some slides. So, more than simply working in public service for 10 years, there are actually 4 criteria. First, you need to have a certain type of loan. It's those federal direct loans that we talked about. Second, you need to be in the correct repayment plan, which is generally going to be an income-driven repayment plan. Third, you need to work in public service. And finally, you need to make 120 qualifying payments, basically 10 years worth of payments. So let's drill down into each of those. So only direct loans qualify for public service loan forgiveness, or PSLF. Direct loans have been the main federal loan since 2010 when the FEL loan program ended. So if you took out a loan since then, it is likely a qualifying direct loan. But if you have an older loan, again, those FEL loans, or if you have a Perkins loans, those do not qualify. We already talked about how to confirm what kind of loan you have. You can go to studentaid.gov and download your data, and you'll see at the top there where that #1 arrow was, if it's FEL or direct or otherwise. What you can do, though, if you don't have a direct loan, is consolidate those loans into a direct loan, which again is a process of taking out a new loan with the Department of Education to pay down your old loan. It's like refinancing, and you can do that online. When you consolidate, though, it's important to know that you may lose credit for forgiveness that you had earned on the older loan. So when you go from an ineligible loan to an eligible loan, the years that you worked to make payments on the ineligible loan are not credited over to the new loan. For service members in particular, there's also potential risk in consolidation, and that's that under the Service Member Civil Relief Act, you can get a reduction of interest rate for active duty borrowers for anyone with a student loan interest rate over 6%. So if you're active duty, it'll get brought down to 6% during that time, but this only for federal and private loans, but this only applies to loans that were taken out prior to beginning service. So if you're consolidating, you're actually taking out a new loan, and this would be taken out during your service, and that wouldn't be considered pre-service, which means you wouldn't get the interest rate reduction under the Service Member Civil Relief Act for this new consolidated loan. If your new loan has an interest rate of 6% or lower, then it really doesn't matter, because that's what the Service Member Civil Relief Act brings it down to, but it is something to keep in mind. Still, again, for some folks who otherwise wouldn't qualify because they have the wrong loan type, consolidating is worth it, even with these potential losses. Having the wrong loan is a major reason why folks get denied public service loan forgiveness, so it's important to know that you can fix that if you do have the wrong loan through consolidation. Okay, so second criteria, your direct loan needs to be in the right payment plan, which is generally going to be an income-driven repayment plan, which sets your monthly payment as a percentage of your discretionary income, generally 10 to 15%. It doesn't matter how much you pay, just that you're on the right plan. So, you can even have $0 payments if you have low income. Some other plans other than IDR, income-driven repayment plans, do work. The 10-year standard plan, which is what you pay each month if you're paying down your loan over 10 years, can count. The extended repayment plan, which gives you lower monthly payments, but over a longer period than 10 years, does not qualify. And the graduated payment plan, where it's 10 years, but you start with low payments each month and you end with higher payments each month, sometimes qualifies. The higher payments can qualify. But in almost all instances, you're going to want to be in an IDR, income-driven repayment plan, in order to qualify for PSLF. So third, to get public service loan forgiveness, you need to work in public service. That, you think that would be simple. As Chris mentioned, the focus is on your employer, not your role, and that's where it can cause some problems. You can work for a government organization, so that covers city, state, and federal employees, military members of the military, folks working in nonprofits, and 501c3 nonprofits, and certain other nonprofits are covered. If you work in a seemingly public service role, but for a disqualified employer, like a private sector employer, that's not considered public service under the current definition. You also have to work a full-time job, which is defined as a minimum of 30 hours a week, either at one employer or across multiple qualifying employers for at least 30 hours. If your employer, for whatever reason, defines full-time for them as more than 30 hours, then you need to work whatever their definition of 30 hours is, just to make sure you have a full-time qualifying public service employer. So finally, you need to make 120 of these qualifying payments, payments on the right loan, the right payment plan, and during the correct employment. The payments have to be made in full and on time. If you leave public service and then come back, you can continue where you left off. You do not need to start over. The payments don't need to be consecutive, but you do need to have 120 of them. Okay, so what's the actual process for getting forgiveness? So your employer and you need to fill out that form that Chris mentioned. It's called an ECF, an employer certification form. There's one servicer that administers the whole public service loan forgiveness program called FIA, and it does business as Fed Loan Servicing. So you as a borrower need to send Fed Loan, FIA, an ECF form. It'll then do a preliminary review to make sure you have an eligible loan. And then if it does, it'll transfer your account over to FIA for servicing, at which point it'll run through the other criteria like employment and payments. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of problems with people finding out too late in the game that they thought they qualified, but for some reason they don't. For this reason, we agree with what Chris said. It's a really good idea to immediately submit an ECF if you're interested in the program to identify any potential issues you have, and then do it each year as you build towards 10 years of forgiveness, right? Even if it takes longer than 10 years, if you leave an employer and go and then come back, just do it each year. That way you're keeping track of your progress. And then as Chris also mentioned, if you change employers and you think it's a qualifying employer, submit another ECF just to make sure your new employer is qualifying. You don't have to do this. You can just wait for 10 years and document everything and apply at once, but there's a greater chance that there'll be an issue that you could have fixed and it's been 10 years and you just kept on with whatever the problem was. So it is a good idea to check in. Another important note is that, and this is unfortunately another example of how the program is more complicated than it needs to be, is that currently you need to also still be working in a public service job at the time that your loans are forgiven. So what that means is that you can have the full 10 years of credit and everything can be correct, but you have to still be, and you can apply, but you have to still be in a qualifying job to get forgiveness. So you can't retire and then get forgiveness or switch to a private sector non-qualified job and get forgiveness. It's very frustrating and it doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's really important to know. It's especially frustrating too, right? Because there's a big backlog of PSLF applications. So folks might be trying to move on with their life, but are waiting for their loans to be forgiven before they make a change. Okay, so there are some important things to know if you're pursuing PSLF right now, like in 2021 and in early 2022, that we're going to flag right now. So last month, 2 servicers, including FIA Fed Loan, the one that does public service loan forgiveness, announced that they will not be continuing their contract to service federal loans after December of this year when their contract expires. So this is significant for many reasons. First, as I mentioned, all federal student loan accounts for these 2 servicers will need to be transferred. That's 1 in 4 borrowers for the federal student loan portfolio across the country. And we know from past large transfers that errors happen and sometimes not all accounts are completely transferred over or information is lost. And this can cause major problems for borrowers down the line who are trying to document their eligibility or payment history or something like that. Also, as we just discussed, FIA is the exclusive servicer for PSLF and also for the Teach Grant program, which means that this transfer is going to disproportionately impact public service workers who have their accounts with FIA. Okay, so if either of these companies, FIA, Fed Loan, or Granite State Management, are your servicers, there are some things you can do to prepare for the transfer. So again, as we've said now a couple of times, update your contact information. You really don't want to miss any notices about this online and your mailing address. Also, you should call your servicer and request that they send you a complete copy of your account, including all payment histories and any PSLF, ECF forms. You can get some of that online, but you should call and tell them that you want a complete copy in case there's some information that's not online. Finally, if you encounter an issue, file a complaint. You can contact the Federal Student Loan Ombudsperson at FSA. You can go to studentaid.gov to find out more about that, or file a complaint with the CFPB or your state's Attorney General. If you're having a problem, someone else probably is too, and it's a really powerful form of advocacy to say something when you see something, right? Because not everyone else has the ability to advocate for themselves. Okay, so we do still have some unanswered questions about the state of sort of federal student loan debt. As I'm sure you're aware, there's a big public call for debt cancellation with some high-profile supporters. We don't know if this will happen, and if it does happen, we don't know how much will be forgiven. The payment pause was just extended to the end of January. They said it's the final extension of the payment pause, so we'll see if that's the case, and we'll see if the federal government uses this time to fix some problems that are going on in the system that we've touched on. We don't know what companies or company will take over from FIA and Granite State accounts. We'll have to see. And we also don't know if servicers will be ready, in terms of staffing, to turn back on payments at the end of January after almost 2 years of having reduced workload. Have they restaffed, et cetera? So these are all questions that folks are asking and looking for answers. Okay, so we mentioned the public service loan forgiveness has not been working well, and that's probably a really gross understatement. Chris highlighted this a bit too. The program was created in 2007. So the first wave of people who were eligible were in 2017, and pretty immediately we began to see that there were problems. So the initial rejection rate was 99%, right? Only 800 applicants out of 90,000 were approved. Folks were denied for all sorts of reasons. They had the wrong loan, or they had the wrong repayment plan, or something that really was technical and had nothing to do with whether they had actually done 10 years of public service work that should have qualified them. As you can imagine, this was a huge problem and a big failure. Many folks really planned their life around this, and then it turned out that the system wasn't working for them the way that they were told that they would be. So Congress acted and created something called the Temporary Expanded PSLF, which was a special fund to help borrowers who were initially rejected. The program really only makes one change though, and that's that if you were everything else was right, but you were in the wrong repayment plan, you can still qualify for forgiveness under TEPSLF. But everything else had to be met. So this really doesn't do anything for the teacher who has the FEL loan, but was never told she needed to consolidate to a direct loan. It just didn't solve the problem for her or for others like her. And unfortunately, once it started, TEPSLF had a similar, success rate. 99% of folks were initially rejected after they applied. So there's still, a lot of problems with the program, and we need to make the promise of public service loan forgiveness work. So the PSLF failure affects service members too, as public service workers. They're very clearly public service workers, and many of whom have sacrificed a lot to protect our country and put themselves on the line. 92% of service member applicants, or 1,410 service members, were denied loan forgiveness, while only 124 actually were granted it. And on this slide, you can see a breakdown along the branches of the military. We have a testimony here from a service member in Virginia who said, "I enlisted in the Air Force in 1990 and I graduated from law school in 1998. I'm now approaching my 15th year of federal service, and I owe more in student debt than I did when I graduated, over $100,000. The number of payments I've made that qualify for PSLF is 0. So clearly the system isn't working, and the promise of student loan debt forgiveness hasn't been kept. Now, some people do get their loans forgiven though, as Chris mentioned, and currently you can apply for PSLF and TEPSLF at the same time and be reviewed for both. And there's a lot of pressure to get the system fixed. So I do encourage you not to get too discouraged and to take this information, share it with friends and family, check on your loan status, and continue to work towards forgiveness. Some good news is that the Department of Education, as Chris previewed, for the first time ever, is asking borrowers to tell them about their experience with public service loan forgiveness. Again, 10 years of service should be 10 years of service, and then you get your loans forgiven, regardless of the payment plan or loan type. That was the promise, and it really hasn't worked out and hasn't been kept. So now borrowers who got bad advice from their servicer or have delayed retirement to get more qualifying payments or whatever else they've done in their life have a chance to tell President Biden about their struggles with PSLF. Their stories will be part of an official record that the government will have to respond to and use to reassess the program. So the comment period is open through September 29, so again, about a month. And already thousands and thousands of borrowers from across the country have shared their responses. On the bottom of this slide, I've put a link to a form that you can use. It's an online tool to file an official comment. You can go in and tell your personal experience, and then the website will format it the right way to file with the federal government at regulations.gov to be part of an official comment. So again, in addition to taking steps to manage your loans and get on the right track for forgiveness, please take time to call for change for yourself, for others in your community, for people you don't know, but who might not have been informed that they have this opportunity. And call for the PSLF program to be fixed and for the promise to be kept. I have another service member testimonial. This one has been filed already to President Biden through this campaign, through this request for stories, for experiences. So this one says, my loans never qualified for the PSLF. I've moved my family around the country. I've deployed to Afghanistan. I've served for almost 15 years, and I'm still paying student loans because this program helps hardly no one. I don't understand why a program would be created to financially assist public servants, but then only be offered to a select few. This program was one of the primary reasons I joined the military, but no one told me I had the wrong type of loan and wouldn't be qualified for the PSLF in the first place. Again, we encourage you to share your stories too. Some of these are very difficult to read and difficult to share, but it's important. It can be stories of what went wrong, of the commitments and sacrifices that you may have made, or even just that you're a public service worker and you never heard of this, which is a failure in its own. Your servicer should have told you about this. So every story is valuable, and especially telling stories on behalf of folks who can't tell their own. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. We do have some time and want to take some questions from folks. And again, want to encourage everyone who can to file a comment. So I'm going to bring down the shared screen. Please use the chat function if you'd like to ask a question, and we'll try to answer any questions that folks might have with the time that we have left. So we'll wait and see if folks have questions. And if not, I just want to reiterate that we do have these next 30 days. This is the first time in the 14-year history of this program that the Education Department, the federal government, has affirmatively said, tell us what's working with this program, tell us what's not. They are inviting the opportunity to make it better. So it's a really unprecedented opportunity, and we encourage folks to take advantage of it, especially for service members and veterans and their families who have unique circumstances that should qualify them for public service loan forgiveness in many instances. Share your story. It can be a positive story, a sad story. It can be really anything about your experience repaying your student loans. And as Chris I'll echo him from the beginning, share it on behalf of folks who can't share their own story, right? Maybe they're deployed, maybe for whatever reason, they're just not able to access this kind of information, and learn that they can go online and do this. It can take 5 minutes. So, in addition to telling folks in your life, please take a moment and go on and add to this campaign and this call for action.
Absolutely. Well, we're waiting to see if we get any other questions. I will make two more quick comments. That's okay. Certainly, as Winston said about Fed loan, which is the current servicer that folks probably have, if they have submitted an employment certification form, to make sure you might want to download some of your things from their website, or in the context of them no longer being the servicer and transferring the accounts, if you're able to access your account and take some screenshots or download certain forms or whatever you think might be important in order to ensure that hopefully nothing's lost, but if it is, you would have it. Some of the things, I know family members who are trying to get PSLF, and some of the experiences we've had have been really challenging too. Some of the things that people weren't told right away, the consolidation from FEL loans to direct loans was needed, and months were lost. That payments were made, but those payments don't count. That's what I mean by I say months are lost. So I think that that's really a frustrating thing, and something I hope that for folks who maybe now have consolidated and transferred, that are able to point that out in their comments, or are able to try and hopefully see that we can't get that someday fixed.
And I see in the chat, folks have asked where they can share their stories. The slide's not up anymore. It isn't. The link is in the chat. We put it in there twice, just to make sure folks see it. And I would just really echo everything Chris said. One thing I would add though is, it can be really frustrating managing your student loans, and it's very possible that you spent hours, days trying to fix things a couple of years ago. And I will say the mere fact that the Department of Education is asking for this input shows that it's a different day right now, right? Like, so don't let a bad experience you had over the past couple of years color your opportunity to have a more positive experience going forward. I mean, they affirmatively asked for this and are clearly interested in trying to do the right thing. So we've all got to, take that bad experience you might have had and just put it in our comment, but don't let it be a reason why we don't participate. And I'll say that's the same for asking for individualized help. There is an ombudsperson at FSA, which is the sort of student loan office within the Department of Education. And if you're having an issue with your servicer, you can complain to the CFPB and to your state attorney general, but you can also file a complaint with the FSA ombudsperson. And if you sort of Google, if you go to studentaid.gov or if you Google FSA ombudsperson, you'll get right to the contact information. And that office has made it very clear in the last few months that they really want to connect with individual borrowers and solve some of the problems that are happening. So certainly through the comment campaign, but just generally speaking, it's, now is a good time to self-advocate and advocate on behalf of others.
Absolutely. Our voices together are stronger than apart. So I think this is a moment when the collective voices of sharing experiences, even people who have overcome some obstacles, is really important to know what those are. So that's why we really encourage it. These things, more and more people will be getting this as time passes, but we want people who have lost months or have lost payments or whatever to also, potentially be able to get those. And that's why we're pushing the department and the administration to look at making necessary changes.
Yeah. So it doesn't look like there's more questions now, though folks should, of course, follow up. Maybe, Chris, if we can each share our organization's website. So protectborrowers.org for the Student Borrower Protection Center. You can go on and see some of the information we do there. And Chris, you want to share VES's?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. We're at vetsedsuccess.org. VETSED success.org. And we have an area of our website on Contact Us where you can have a complaint or an issue with a school or your loans or anything related to higher education. We have people that can speak to you about that, as well as we definitely want to hear from you about any higher ed issue, but especially PSLF.
Right. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thank you, VES, for partnering with us on this. And really, it's in the chat. Don't forget, take 5 minutes and go file your story and share this information with your friends and family and colleagues. But thank you very much. Thank you for your service and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
All right.